Yeah, I've let Peter, Paul, and what is it? That's a funny thing, eh? The Beatles. Peter, Paul, and Yayan know that we've jumped back online. So thank you. So I'll hand over to you, team, and go for it. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon again, councillors. So, excuse me. So, the purpose of this briefing is, as we've got up there on the page, we want to just very briefly recap the context for the draft annual plan. We want to give you an overview of what's going to be in the deliberations report, including the different sections and the staff advice that's going to sit there. We have some additional information that we can give you from the briefing on the 1st of May. We'll give you the key dates and the process that we're proposing to go through on the day of deliberations, and then advise you of the next steps post deliberations. So Dave will talk to all the financial content in the presentation, and Sonia's going to talk to the PT updates and answer any more PT questions. So just to very, very briefly recap the context for the draft annual plan. This annual plan is firmly based on what we agreed for year 2 of the long-term plan. So we still have our strategic direction, the outcomes that we've developed through the impact framework, our focus on the 3 core services, the work programs and budgets that we developed for year 2 of the long-term plan. We do know there are some changes that we've had to reflect into where we're at with the draft annual plan, and then more changes since we went out on consultation. This primarily impacts the PT work program, and Sonia will talk to that a little bit more. We're also very conscious that there continues to be challenging economic conditions. Dave will probably provide a little bit more update on how that plays out for this annual plan, but also that there is some good news around inflationary pressures and interest rates. And we know that has a real impact on the households within Canterbury, but also for us as an organisation as well. So in terms of the deliberations report, we've still based that firmly on the draft annual plan that went out for consultation, and just a reminder that had a 9.9% average total rates increase included in it. We've also looked at any changes since the draft annual plan was developed. We've looked at the consultation process, what we heard through consultation and the submissions and the hearings. We've reviewed where we're at with all the service measures and the outcome measures, and we've continued as we've built up this deliberations report that's in a draft format at the moment, looked at how each one of those items has an impact on the average total rates.
Yeah, so councillors, there's 2 very quick slides first, and then I'll talk to 2 others later in the presentation. But these are more reminders for some work that you did late last year, I understand. The first one is the rates on how it got from 15.5 to 9.9. And I'm just going to hold there a minute, but the second one, if I can go to that, has some similarities, but this is the deficit, how it moved from 3.3, which was in year 2 of the long-term plan, to the decisions that were made in the draft pre-Christmas, which took it to a deficit of 4.9 million. So these 2 slides just reminders of those. That's information been previously shared, and the other 2 slides, which will come up shortly, have a bit more detail on a couple of other topic areas, which I'll go into more detail with.
Happy to do it now? Yep. There you go, Grant.
Thanks, David. I was just a bit unsure about where the slide here fitted in. Are you saying that slide's just for information and that it still relates to the 9.9%?
So the purpose of these slides were just reminders of where you ended up late last year before you went into the draft annual plan. So this is the rates perspective, the first one. Yep, so from 225 million in the long-term plan to 214 million, and the consequential percentage impact. And then the second one is the surplus, or deficit in this case actually, where the long-term plan had a deficit of 3.3 million, and it's gone in the draft annual plan to consultation was 4.9 million.
Can I just add that that particular page there is in response to a question that came up at the last briefing on the 1st of May, which I think, Dion, you might have asked.
Claire?
Sorry.
I'll come back to you, Grant. I'll just let Claire ask questions.
And I think if it's, as I understand it, Councillor Edge's question, and it relates to this is as the draft annual plan went out,
Yeah.
and you're going to then come on with some more changes, and that 4.9 mil will look different.
So
Thanks
this is
for that.
nothing new, Grant. It's all pre-Christmas numbers. Yeah.
But your summation, Chair, that summation was correct.
And I just wondered, the first thing about rates movement. It's just how does that relate to the previous slide? But you're just saying it's just information. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just a fact of what it was when the annual plan went out. That was the deficit projected. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Carry on.
Okay, so that those slides were sort of the context scene setting for where we're at right now. So in terms of the actual deliberation report, how we've set it out, there'll be the background section capturing some of just what we've been through. We'll then have a summary of our consultation approach and submissions and what we heard through the hearings process. The next main section will be all our public transport work program updates, consultation topics updates, what we've heard through consultation and staff advice. And then the next section will be fees and charges. We then have a section around any other core service changes, which at this stage is just with regards to outcome measures or service measures. The last main section there will be around the risk-based and financial assumptions to be deliberated on. So that's going to be the order of the deliberations report, unless we hear any feedback today from you that you would like something different. And then obviously there will be recommendations against each of those items for councillors to deliberate on. So we will consistently follow that format with how we set out recommendations and how we set out the actual report. Hopefully that makes sense.
Grant?
It was very helpful with the long-term plan when we had everything set out on a page, like a one-page outline. With the starting point was the LTP at 15.5%. So we have a saving. We arrived at a saving of 5.6 million in terms of dollars to reduce it. Is that right? 5.6 to reduce it down to 9.9%. Is it possible, just for information, when it comes back to us, that everything's very clear about LTP said this, we then went through a process that gave us this, and then now we're in this. So it's kind of very clear. Basically information on a page. I think that was really good. So a summary of adjustments, reductions, and the impacts of the rates rise would be useful. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's very much what we're trying to achieve. So it's like the sort of telling the narrative in a chronological way as it's happened. So what we said in the LTP for year 2, what we then agreed in the draft annual plan for consultation, then what's changed since then that requires further consideration. So we're trying to do that throughout the whole report, but break it down section by section as well, so that particularly for public transport, there's a lot that's happened around the work program and it needs its own specific section. Fees and charges is probably a little bit more consistent in the other items as well. So thank you for saying that. It's very much what we're trying to do. Okay. So probably don't need to recap this, but so what we're doing now is just moving into giving you a very brief overview of what's actually in each section of the deliberations report. So just to recap, for the consultation and submissions will be a high-level summary. You've heard most of this information before. It just very much captures what we consulted on, the approach we took, what we heard back from the community and who came and spoke to hearings. So it's a reasonably brief section in the report, and you've had most of this information before. So I'm going to hand over to Sonia to say a little bit more about public transport.
So in terms of the public transport section in the deliberations paper, we talked to the 3 key topics that we consulted on. And obviously you will have got the summary of the consultation previously. Then we talked to, there was a number of changes that we specified in the draft annual plan that weren't necessarily consulted on because of the level of significance. We've also had a subsequent briefing on the 7th of May outlining some of the changes to the PT landscape. So those will be included in the PT deliberations paper, and will make it really clear where it's kind of that new context in terms of what has changed subsequent to the draft annual plan going out for consultation. And then obviously bringing that through into the financials around what's the impact there to the budget for the annual plan. So the 3, you'll see up there, the 3 items that we consulted on was around the fare structure, the Darfield to Rolleston trial, and the trial uplifts to the Selwyn service, so Route 85. In addition, we did propose a number of other changes in the 7th of May briefing, and those will all be itemised in the deliberations report, and where necessary will include a recommended resolution.
A question from John, and then I'll go to you, Grant.
Thank you. It's a question come statement. I have asked Giles if there is an ability to utilise some of the reserve funding for a potential Darfield to Rolleston trial as opposed to direct user pay your targeted rate. So I'm just letting people know that I've asked that question and seeing if there is a mechanism to soften the blow to those ratepayers if we chose to go in that direction. I'm still really convinced we need to try something. So I'm just letting you know that I've asked that question, and if we vote for it in deliberations, then it may not be a binary yes or no. It might be a can we manufacture something over a 12-month period to try or the like. So just recognising that. And as to the 85, again, there was Facebook today with traffic congestion in Rolleston and people saying, well, get on the bus. And they're going, don't get on the bus because the bus is already full and we're leaving people behind. So really critical what we do within Rolleston for that 85 and services to the city with the dual challenges that we face there. Thanks.
Grant?
Yeah, I'm a similar vein. The more information you can give us so that we can look at the choices that we might have to make. I'm going back, and I'm kind of going back to the original LTP 15.5%, 15.6% saving, $11 million. Some of that saving was to do with general reserves and how that's handled. But yeah, I'm similarly really keen to make sure in this one that we have, because we had a big discussion about the community vehicle trust, the need for maybe support or the idea of support for the vehicle trusts, and as John says, this idea of Darfield, Kuwi, Rolleston, that kind of thing, it needs to be in the loop in my mind in terms of discussion. Even though and it's something that you can say, it's not recommended to be progressed. It means that we can actually have a discussion on it, and we know what the costs would be in terms. Well, I think we need to, in all of these, identify the targeted rate and the area being targeted, but also really picking up the comment from the mayor, who said, what if it was more of a general rate to assist with the delivery of some of these things, and we didn't really go there too much. Or is it a combination of targeted with general to work out the balance? So rather than getting into a really complex discussion with any proposed amendments, that if that was laid on the table for us very clearly, then it just makes it a bit of a smoother ride for any additional proposals that people might want to put forward.
Yep, very good. And then we'll go to you, Ian and Vicky.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a comment around consultation. and what we went out to consult with the community on. So we just have to watch that significance trigger. If there are new things that are going to be proposed during deliberations, we just have to be very cautious around bringing something that perhaps we would also be bringing the advice to say, you might need to reconsult on that. So I'm just flagging that now in terms of what we would bring back. Thank you.
That is the point of flagging it now.
Oh.
Maybe, no.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Cool.
Just on that, I circled the word significance too, and what does that mean? Is it significance in terms of consultation, or is it significance in terms of the change from the LTP?
It's significant in terms of whether it's triggered under the council's engagement, significance and Māori participation policy, for one thing. So, and in that it is quite broad in terms of any communities of interest. It could be significant because of the dollar figures. It could be significant because it's not what you consulted on, and therefore, as a council, you might say that you couldn't put that in without reconsulting. So there's a sort of reasonably low bar in terms of. Yeah, so I mean, we can come back with advice, and that's exactly
sure.
why, in terms of raising it now, is helpful. But I just wanted to flag that. Yep.
Ian, and then I'll go to you, Vicky.
Well, I think we reflect on the Darfield Rolleston and even the Rolleston town routes, you've got to remember that the vast majority of submissions were that the users should pay and that there shouldn't be ratepayer subsidies. And so I find it. I think you need to temper the advice you're getting from some councillors around what you should bring to us with what the submitters said very clearly to us, regardless of what the service was. There was a very clear and strong message that they wanted the users to pay, not to be loaded onto ratepayers.
No, Vicky's your question.
I'm sorry, I've forgotten what it was.
Sorry, we can give you a second. Yeah, look, I think John's made a good point about the request there around the PT reserves to support or otherwise the trial. So I think that's really important to provide us that information and the significance information. I also think the community vehicle trust point that Grant has made is valid too, because we've had submissions from vehicle trusts and we've had a deputation at council. I know that was a bit outside of the annual plan process, but we also had some direct submissions about it. So if it's in scope of submissions, that would be interesting to understand, because it looks to me like they do need support, but what do we do? That's the question from staff, like give us some advice about what you think could be done there. Again, that might be using PT reserves, I don't know. But we need that support to allow that discussion to happen. And I know there was a lot of thoughts around the room of what are the other options for Selwyn that exist outside of that. Is there any? There might not be, but tell us, because we're not the experts on it. So tell us, and even allude to what could be done going forward. Because obviously the community is going to be on us as their elected members to sort it out. So just noting that. So I know there's constraints all the way around, but just help us answer those questions that were raised. There's concern. We're looking for solutions. What could they be? Even if they can't be in this year's annual plan, what does the future look like going forward within the next year, within the scope of what we've got, to try and help those solutions come forward. Vicky, have you thought of your question?
Yeah, I did, my usual. Sorry. In terms, so quite often it's sort of, my sense is that there's some things that we could be doing and that have been brought to us multiple times, and the staffing, there's just not enough staff to get to some of those things, particularly the more immediate things, which is where our communities can sort of, get a sense that there's some hope in things can change in a relatively short period of time, rather than it all being about PT futures and things that are going to roll out over the next 6 years or whatever, the government allowing. So, and I raised that at a previous briefing quite recently. There was actually, does staff need to be looking at, is what we need actually additional staff, not necessarily like finding another solution to an additional bus or whatever, but the unlocking piece is the staffing thing. So has that been looked at? Is that something you can put through? I know it's late in the day, but I think that's actually really, really important if that's quite commonly a thing that's holding us back.
So we've been doing some work on essentially what the year 2 and year 3 work programme looks like, and as part of that we're looking at the resourcing level. So we haven't quite got a picture of exactly what that would look like and what would be needed to do all these different component parts. It is something we're working on, so we're probably not ready to bring that conversation back through this annual plan, but it could be a conversation that we keep revisiting.
So does that, I mean, is there a difference? So like the reserves, I mean, I know we don't want to just keep on falling back on reserves, but is that an opportunity? Because if it's going to be like another year wait until we can and then you've got to go out, you get the confirmation through the next annual plan, and then you have to go through recruitment, and suddenly we're like a whole year and a half away or more. So yeah, are there some mechanisms with a bit of, can make some shifts and changes without it coming through this this annual plan?
Yep, sorry, that's what we'll be looking at, because taking on board the advice that essentially a year is a long time to wait.
Yeah, Grant, or more?
Yeah, just following up on the reasoning, why I'm suggesting this. It's based on the submission from the Selwyn District Council through the Mayor, who, as part of his submission, identified a very recent list of transport-related issues that were part of the Selwyn District Council's long-term plan. And the submissions from the community were way more than what we had. And his argument was 20 people here and 10 people over here don't necessarily mean that they have the consensus of the population, just despite that coming through for our consultation.
Yeah, Grant, I think we all heard that.
I know, but I mean, I'm just responding
Yeah,
to what Councillor Mackenzie's saying.
Well, I don't think we need to here because we're not debating it.
No,
right
no,
now.
I know. But
I think we all heard that, we understand that, and that's something that we all need to consider as part of the deliberations. But I think the useful thing is for staff to help us, provide us those options about what could be done. I mean, we know what our feedback said, but we also know there is a wider community need and interest in this. So what are the things that we could do? So I think there's a range of things. There's John's idea of a PT reserve assisted trial. There's what support can go to community vehicle trusts. What other staff increases could help unblock some things in the next year to flow on to an LTP next year. I think those are the sort of things we need to come back to us as options. Or otherwise, I think what will happen is we will get amendments from our elected members and we'll have to work through them at the time. So just let's help each other to try to work through that. Cool.
Can I just say, I'm not looking for a full business case of this can work through and absolutely increase your workload. If the answer is yes, it's possible and it could be achieved, then it's something that we can then work through if we agree to take it forward, as opposed to having it all locked down on the day of. So I'm not trying to really ramp the work up. It's going, is it possible? If it's possible, then it becomes part of a conversation and a decision, and what it might finally look like post deliberations be what it is. So I'm just trying to be very careful that I understand the recommendations, I see it, and just try to find a way forward.
Yeah, Sonia.
Sorry, I don't want to keep being the bearer of bad news as well, but I think it's worth us talking to here because it will be something that comes up through the deliberations. So essentially at the moment within New Zealand, we have a shortage of age-compliant fleet available across New Zealand. It's a real challenge for us when we're thinking about these new routes in terms of where we would prioritise putting any fleet that we would be able to secure. There's a lot of reasons, and essentially a lot of the funding restrictions have meant that we don't have the fleet coming through because we don't have the new fleet coming into New Zealand. And therefore, every PTA around the country is chasing these older diesel vehicles to look at actually how they can use those for improvements. So that does have an impact essentially on how much we're able to do. So at some point we need to look at kind of where those priority areas are.
Yeah, and I think that's useful information to help us make decisions during deliberation. So thank you, Sonia. We'll move on. Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the next section in the deliberations report is around the consents, fees and charges. So I'll speak to this at a high level, but I see we've got Paul in the room now, so if you do have some more detailed questions between him and Dave, you'll be able to answer them. So there were 3 key topics that we consulted on, and the staff advice in the deliberations report, it will be that these are all included within the fees and charges schedule that will take effect from the 1st of July. And that staff advice is based on the feedback we heard through the submissions process. So that's just a very high level what we will include in the deliberations report. Now we're trying to provide some additional information here based on a question from the last briefing where we covered fees and charges. So since that briefing on the 1st of May, we have continued to analyse the information we've received from submitters, in particular those ones that gave comments through the submissions process. So there were 87 separate submissions that included comments under the fees and charges questions. What we've done is categorised those comments into 6 different categories in this table here. So based on what we believe the submitter was saying. So the different categories are the submitter saying they do support user pays. They think maybe the rates we're collecting for this are too high, or the cost recovery target is too low. And those 3 categories, we believe in reading the comments, are where collectively the submitters are saying we support your proposal or would like you to even do more in collecting user pays. But there are also a number of comments around it. What you'd be better to focus on is increasing efficiency and cutting costs, and a couple of specific comments around you should not do any changes here but wait for future central government direction to come through. So we've allocated those comments into the 6 different categories, and then what we've done is then further allocated them against, did the submitter say, no, I don't support your proposal, or I do support it, or in some cases they provided comments but didn't make a selection if they supported it or not. So there's not one simple answer we can give you here for these questions. I think probably my conclusion is for councillors in this area, you have a choice. Do you look at how people have selected a preference? Do you look at what the comments were? Do you look at their preference and their comments together? There's different ways you can look at this information, but we have tried to give you some more clarity in this table here to help you with the decision making. In addition to that, it's not mentioned here, we know there are some other questions coming through to staff around this consents, fees and charges. And so what we're proposing is we will put those questions together collectively and send and provide via our government's team an email back out to all councillors. So you're getting seeing the questions and the same level of information. So are you happy with that?
Question? Oh, yeah, Vicky.
Sorry, no, you go to the next bit because
Cool.
it's really...
Yeah.
So this is the representment of a slide that was at the previous briefing in early May, and particularly in response to Councillor Mackay's question, and trying to make this crisp about what the 14.1% was, which is an increase in charge-out rates multiplied by hours and number of consents. That gets us to the revenue number. Also to highlight where we currently are and where Paul's team currently are, just to give you confidence on the progress towards that user pays percentage. Also highlighting, just reminding councillors about the range, the 60 to 80%, which is the one contained in the revenue and financing policy. And also just highlighting, whilst you've consulted on the 14.1, and that's what's in the draft annual plan, if you'd done nothing, the gap would have been 2.4 million, but actually we picked up last time on the 1.6 million, which was the difference between what you consulted on and the other alternative, which was 4.7. So hopefully that just crisply picks up the key questions that you had at the last briefing.
Cool, thank you. Yep, Vicky.
Yeah, so I put through a question which was raised through submitters proposing that we, what if we were to go to 75% recovery? And, I think the previous table indicates quite a lot of people feeling that actually we could justify recovering more. So just in terms of, because I asked, well, what's the difference in terms of general rate? Because obviously, ultimately, we're quite interested in what the rate percentages are. And just from your table and using an assumption that year the totals, like it looks to me like we if we were to go to 75% recovery user pays on the consenting, we could potentially save $2 million of general rates. I think it's in that ballpark, which is a 1.2% decrease in general rates across all the ratepayers. So could you just confirm for me if Maya's trying to draw out this table, it's not quite presented like that, but is that about?
Yes, Councillor, your maths is absolutely correct. So that's the numbers that I've landed on as well. I'd also note that there's a mixture here of impact of staff charge-out rates and efficiencies, but the staff charge-out one, if we just landed on that, that would need about a 25% roughly charge-out rate increase, just to give you that data point as well, in order to achieve that 75% in this year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so rather than plus 14 average, plus 25 average. And another question I had was whether, because there were a couple of external sort of consultant rates that were presented to us differently from internal staffing rate ranges. So, I mean, are there other external consultants? And one of the things that was asked by a submitter was, should those be recovered at full just at cost? So could you just explain what happens if we have external consultants with specialist input that's needed? Like, do they sort of, are they subsidised by rates as well? And I know consultancy rates typically would be quite a lot higher than any of our staff rates in my, from what I know of consultancy charges.
Chair, I think there's two options to answer that. Either our consents team could come here, or we could come back in the feedback that Carmen's talked about, which will go to all councillors to answer that specific question.
Everyone, yeah. Yep.
Sorry, what?
Best to come to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Grant?
How does that, or how should that be handled in deliberations? Do we? Is it a hands up for 66, 75, or is it working on the assumption that it's the 14%, and if anybody wants to change that, so
I think the key thing is Vicky's raised the thing about what's the implications of it, and Dave's given us an answer to that, but to get that formally would be good. I think this one is a relatively simple amendment if councillors wanted to do that. Personally, I think it's really important that we look at what the feedback is. Yep, you're right, Vicky. Some might have wanted to push it further, but we already are making quite a substantial change. So yeah, I think this one's a bit simpler. But to know the ramifications of that decision, if someone did want to push that way, is really important for everybody to make a good decision on that. So.
Another piece of information that would be really, really helpful with this for me would be some examples of consent applications, typical ones. So, if you're applying for septic tank consent for a individual property, what's the real dollar term difference for that? If you're applying for, just a few sort of typical, and then perhaps some of those more exceptional big consent applications, what are the real dollar term differences, and what types of that would help me with some of my decision making, I think.
It's potentially pretty complex, but well,
it is the example that was put in the consultation document. There's an average increase of 14.1% over the total thing.
Yeah, I get that. So that's just, I don't know how many hours of consent officer time goes to different types of consents. And so for some, that actually, those extra dollars per hour, if it's not that many hours, doesn't make an enormous amount of difference in real dollar terms. That's what I'm trying to get to. And then you've got the more specialist stuff, and say who might be bringing in external consultant hours as well. And I would like to know what sort of things are our ratepayers subsidising, and to what tune, and who's getting that subsidy, because that's important pieces of information for us to understand to make that decision, I think.
Paul, you got a response?
Yeah, I if it's a question of to David's point, if we can provide some examples to help you deliberations, that's fine. That's information that we should be able to pull together. I wouldn't want to tempt having the conversation here and get it wrong. So I'd rather go away and give you those examples. Typical versus more complicated or more exceptional. That's stuff that we can provide. I'm pretty sure.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora. Greg, got a question?
Yeah, I have. Thanks, Chair. Mine sort of goes on a wee bit from Vicky, and I know we're talking financials and percentages a bit, but given the Federated Farmers submission was around wanting a substantial contribution to consenting costs from the general rate, and they're saying that it was justified on the benefits to the general public and the environment, can we get some sort of, what does that mean? Because I think that's important to put it in there as well. Thanks.
Well, any response, Paul? Sorry.
Is the question that there's a broader benefit to the general public, so therefore there's a justification that we don't recover all the costs? Is that the question?
Well, I sort of feel like that's not for us so much, because that was a submitter's point of view about how that should be. I think what we've got in front of us is a change from where we've been to get us to the 66%, which is through this consultation that's been supported by the feedback that we've had. Yes, some submitters might have pushed back at that, but then we've got councillors wanting to push further. But yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the staff advice around this, but also saying if councillors did want to push further towards that, what's the ramifications? That's similar with significance, like the same as before in terms of the PT stuff, so that we're clear and then people can make an informed decision. Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Thank you. Ian?
I mean, and part of the advice perhaps the team might bring to us along those lines, Craig, is where we have incredibly complex plans or complex plans that overlap. And Paul will know that, where people who are involved in PC5 and PC2 areas where they've got totally different rules and different requirements, but it's only one farm, but they overlap. And the consequence of that, and so Vicky wanted an example of costs imposed, some of those consenting costs for land use, for a renewal of their land use consent might be up around $30,000 or $40,000. So those guys may be unfairly affected by this only because we have particularly complicated plans, which makes their land use consent renewals very complicated.
Good. We'll get into the debate on this in deliberations, but any more questions? Yep, way you go, Claire.
Thank you. I think just to round out this, it would be helpful to actually have some background information of why we've got ourselves into this position. When we had a policy in our 2021 fees and charges policy, which the organisation as a whole didn't follow through on. And if we had, even at the maximum policy, we would still be looking at 12% increase, as I understand it. So, which, we as a council table have got some responsibility for too. But so just that background of why we're now having to do this might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next bit. Thank you.
Okay, so the next section in the deliberations report is around any other core service changes, and at this point in time, and what's included in the draft deliberations report is there are no further changes to the ERP work program or the environmental regulation and protection and community preparedness response to hazard work programs. There are some changes to the outcome measures and service measures, and these have been included in the draft annual plan that was provided for consultation. In addition to that, there is one new proposed outcome measure in the public transport area, which I might pass to Sonia to speak to, and then I'll come back to the other couple of points on the page.
The proposed change, which wasn't included in the draft annual plan, is to add a new measure which talks to the percentage of Maori reserve land area in Greater Christchurch within 400 metres of an active bus stop. So that would be an annual report. We've managed to baseline that, so that's something we can add into the annual plan. And the idea would be effectively that measure, we'd see that increasing.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so the staff advice in the deliberations report will be all the changes to the outcome measures or service measures that were included in the draft annual plan for consultation, plus this additional public transport outcome measure are included in the annual plan. However, there's one additional point here I would like some advice on now is, as your councillors will be aware, we're making a lot of progress with how we are developing the baselines and reporting against the new outcome measures that we agreed in the impact framework through the LTP. We had a briefing about this on the 10th of April, and we're continuing to make some really good work with those baselines and how we're going to report on them. At the moment in the draft annual plan, we have set out quite a lot of detail about these outcome measures. These aren't a statutory requirement. They're not audited like the service measures. And we've sort of been thinking ourselves, do we have too much detail included in the annual plan itself that's going to lock us into a point in time with those outcome measures towards the end of June, particularly around our methodology for reporting on them, and then the baseline when we're about to go live. We will go live with this outcomes reporting work in September. So we're potentially, by including so much information in the annual plan itself, we are including information that's going to be set there for the next year, but 2 months later having a lot more up-to-date information online on our website. And so there might be a bit of a disconnect where the plan is at a point in time, the online information will be what's most up to date. So what we'd like to propose is that we continue to include the outcome itself, the outcome measure and the target, but in terms of reporting and on those, the methodology and the baseline, that we take it out of the annual plan document itself and have that online. Hopefully that makes sense, but happy to, it would be great if we could get some feedback on that now, and so we know whether we bring you back every single change and baseline in the annual plan, or we decouple it a little bit.
Yeah, personally, I don't know if I've quite got it, but others might have. Claire?
So is there a possibility of just linking? Because I can understand that you don't want something written in word form that people are going to take as gospel without then going and looking on an online platform. But if you actually had your high-level stuff written there, which is what you're suggesting as I understand it, but then we actually had a link. So people, it would take them there rather than...
So yes, we can do that. Obviously, the website won't be live until September, but we can. So we would still have, just to clarify, we'd still have the outcome, we'd still have our measure and what the target is. So we'd still be clearly articulating for each core service, these are the outcomes we're seeking. This is the measure we're using to determine are we reaching those outcomes, and then what's our target. But in terms of the reporting back against that, we would take it out of the annual plan and have it online, but we can include a link in the annual plan to where it will be in the website.
And so just the reporting bit would be any actual measure and where it's at right now. You're saying don't put that in there, wait till September. Is that effectively what you're saying?
That's effectively what I was saying, because we're almost there with the baselines and we're almost ready to share them, but just not quite. And so if we put in where we're at now in the plan, we are locking it in at this point in time, but we will have more information available in the coming months that will be a lot more up to date.
Yep. Any feedback, Grant?
Yeah. So does that mean you would have a comment or a clause in the deliberations document to say what you're saying now, and that following September, where the baseline measures change, would that have implications for the outcomes that are not included in the budgets, if you like? Would there be an adjustment? You know, how does that work?
We just might.
Then I'll just clarify, so we have the outcome measures, which are new through the development of the impact framework, but we also have the service measures. So we're not talking about service measures here and how they show our service delivery. We're talking about the outcomes we're seeking for the community and the environment. So that's the new piece of work that we've agreed through the last long-term plan, and we've been working on the reporting against them over the last year.
Okay, that clarifies. So the service level doesn't impact.
Carmen, I'm thinking it might just be helpful for us, and not today, but when you bring it back to us, just give us an example of what it would have looked like, and what you're proposing it to look like, and then what it would look like in September. Like that might be useful, and then we can, and not the whole thing, but just here's what we're suggesting. That might be useful for us when we come back. So I don't think there's any allergic reaction in the room, but it's just understanding what we actually mean in reality. What does it look like on the page here? That might be good. Cool.
Thank you. And we would still include in the deliberations report a section on the service measures and outcome measures and what does need to be adopted, but also how we are, making some changes in how we present that information.
Thank you. That'd be useful. Grant?
So just getting back to your first line there, that at the moment there's no proposed changes for ERP, but if changes were mooted by a councillor, then presumably that could have implications, say if it was an additional item, implications for percentage increase or whatever. So that would just be a normal amendment process, and you would have some baseline figures of what that implications would be for percentage. So, but bearing in mind, as long as the changes were not significant, and whatever that means, that you'd be able to we would be able to have a discussion on that if there was some item that was deemed to be, deemed to be a good idea.
I think I can answer by saying if councillors choose to put forward some additional recommendations or changes, we have 2 weeks after deliberations to prepare the final annual plan, which will then come back to council for adoption. So we would need to know what those, you would obviously have to deliberate on what those changes are. If they're passed, then yes, we have time in our process to incorporate them into the final annual plan to come back for adoption. Does that answer the question?
And may I suggest that if councillors are thinking about that they might be useful to get that around to both councillors and staff before deliberations would be useful as an idea about what you want to do, just so there can be some preparation of responses to help with significance and all that could be useful. And because in terms of process, and I think we're going to get onto that soon, we do deliberations, and then ultimate decision is made in June. That's correct, eh? That's right. 25th of June, yeah. Yeah, Ian?
Just a question around that. Are we talking about only additions to the annual plan which involves more expenditure, or are we allowed to bring forward suggestions around cutting out existing programs in the...
Probably both, to be fair, Ian. But I think it's useful if you articulate that very clearly to all of us, your fellow councillors and to staff, so that people can understand it, what that may be. Because rather than doing it all on the day, and we've already got probably a pretty full day anyway, that'd be useful. So that if I can ask for councillors if they are thinking about that, that'd be good. Thank you. Can we move on to the next one? This risk-based, yep.
So we've worked through changes, I guess, proposed for core services. These are now some work we've been doing on the risk-based or financial assumptions. We talked about this at a previous briefing as well. I think I highlighted at the previous briefing there's kind of 3 areas I've been looking at: interest rates, and I make the point that that's interest rates that apply to our floating rate debt, because not all of our debt is floating, so some of it's fixed, a large portion's fixed already. Staff vacancy factor and inflation. In this table, I've tried to highlight on the left-hand side where the assumption is in the draft annual plan. We've got a rate or a rate that we would propose you to consider in your deliberations. I've also highlighted there the risk level, because ultimately this is a risk judgment. Majority of factors impacting these are outside of the organisation's control, and therefore the actual expenditure can land anywhere. And then on the right-hand side, just in the green, I've highlighted the dollar impact on the rates of if you decided to move from the assumption in the draft annual plan to the new proposal, and then that number expressed in percentage terms as well.
Cool, thank you. Dion, you got a
Just wanted to tease out the vacancy factor part. So in the earlier committee, we were talking about 10 to 12% as our current vacancy factor. What is the risk how much risk is there to keep it at that level? And what is the scale moving backwards from there? And then the next question I have is, do we have the underlying assumptions of how many staff we need correct if we're holding such a high vacancy factor?
I think I'll try and answer that in a couple of parts. I think if there was a more aggressive assumption, I say that, a higher assumption to move to, which may reflect where we currently are, my view is that would increase the risk, because ultimately we've still got months to go before where that lands, and the variety of factors which are impacting that vacancy factor at the moment. I think, as you can imagine, this is a topic that is alive and well at the exec team, and they're actively considering the second part of your question. You've heard today, and you've made comments yourself today about there's a lot of good work going on, a lot of hard work going on, but that is burning people out. And I hear anecdotal evidence. We haven't got the time to recruit. Now, I'm just saying that on the fly, but we've got to find mechanisms to work out how can we reduce that vacancy factor. And your point's valid. Is the base okay? Yeah.
So your professional advice would be that the risk, if we did go to that 7%, based on what you have just said, still remains quite low compared to where we are today, and what we're trying to deliver in the annual plan, because we've got to look forward, because the annual plan's 12 months ahead. So just really want that assurance on that.
My professional opinion would be advice to move from the 5 to the 7 would be low risk. I think any organisation is going to have a vacancy factor. It's the time to hire in the market and the market's appetite to provide good candidates. It's a little bit outside of control. I think my professional advice is that is still low. I think if you move higher than that, you're into sort of a more medium zone. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Dion, another one?
Yeah, so I've got one more on this. The other stuff that we had from the PT was 2%, so we're looking at around 3%. We're sitting at around, if we took all your recommendations, we're sitting around the 6.9% averaged rate increase for the region at this stage.
It's a good question. In my previous slide that I presented to you earlier in the month, I had the PT number in here, but that's come out, which was about 2. Your maths is probably pretty close. Yeah.
And I do find it interesting, just to comment, that when I first got at this council, $1 million was 1%, and now it's $2 million is 1%. So we've moved quite a long way in 3 years. So I think when we're talking about adding percentages on rates for this organisation, we're in a different ballgame than we were even just 3 years ago.
Thanks, Dion. Yeah, let's move to the next bit.
Okay, so that gives you an overview of the key sections that are going to be in the deliberations report. So just moving on to the process. So councillors will receive the deliberations report on the 22nd of May, and that's the day it's also published online. The council deliberations are set for the 27th of May, commencing 9 a.m. We are hoping that councillors will be able to get through deliberations in one day, but if that's not possible, then we do have the 29th of May as the reserve day, and we'll be starting at 10:15 a.m. is the time currently scheduled for that. So you will receive the deliberations report in just over a week's time. In terms of the deliberations process itself, our proposal is that we actually take each section of the deliberations report one at a time. You deliberate on that section and agree or not the recommendations before you move on to the next section. So you would cover public transport first, deliberate on the recommendations and complete public transport decisions before moving on to fees and charges. Now that proposal is different for what we did for the long-term plan, because for the long-term plan you went through each recommendation and agreed it in principle first and then came back and formally adopted it in a second round. So we would probably just like a little bit of guidance here. Do you want to do a two-step process like we did with the long-term plan? Bearing in mind there were a lot more rates movements, of those decisions had a lot more impact on how the rates were moving. Or are you happy to take each section at a time, go through once and then move on to the next section?
I think I'm happy to have a look at that once we see the resolutions and how many we've got. And I mean, I think it's logical that we do follow through each section. I think that was useful last time in the long-term plan. So yeah, in terms of a two-step process, that depends on how complicated we think they are. So I'm sort of happy to leave that until we see, and that's a meeting procedure thing rather than a way you have to set it out in the papers. Yeah, we're good. The councillor's happy with that? You understand the two-step thing we did last time because it was complicated. I'm hoping we don't need to do that, but we'll see how complex the resolutions look, I think. So, all good, people? And on a particular topic, we might want to slow it down. So, yeah. Ian?
Well, I just make the point that a high proportion of the discussion is really around public transport, and that tends to affect Greater Christchurch and not some of the other areas. And some of the other areas are facing significant rate rises, and so they're more interested in the outcome of the annual plan rather than the specifics that make up the changes to the annual plan. So I think however we deliberate, we need to accommodate that rather than just say we're going to tick off these 3 items and that means we've now come to a deliberation on the annual plan. I think we need to still vote on the annual plan.
Yeah, we don't vote on the annual plan until the 25th. But yeah, these key decisions are important to inform that and help the staff. Then I think the next thing is between the 27th of May and the 17th of June. That's the 2-week period I think you suggested before, Carmen, where you've got to sort it all out to get back to us for the 17th. Oh, sorry, for the 25th of June, but ultimately the 17th, where you've got to have the report ready. So, yep. And take your point, Ian. We still will do that. I think there's, like we did with the long-term plan, there's almost like we need like a other wrap-up bit, maybe a 5th bullet point there, so that there's some space. And what I said before about if councillors are intending to do anything outside of this, then I think the dates are pretty clear here that it needs to be good, useful to get something into staff actually by the end of this week and to all of us, because it allows time to actually finish off the report by the 22nd of May. And it might just be that anything like that is just banked up as part of the report and said, here's other things that councillors are thinking about, and some commentary on that if there's time. If not, we'll deal with it. What's that?
We could have 16 pieces come in, couldn't
Well,
we?
I hope not. I really hope not. But I'm just saying, to help us, if that is what people are intending to do, you need to do your own work on that. I'm talking to councillors at the moment, and you need to do it soon. Yep. Yep. Grant?
Right, just the 29th of May is the reserve day. We have a meeting in Kaikoura at 3:15. It takes about 2.5 hours to get there.
We sure do.
We'd have to be finished by 12. Is that? I mean, we don't.
In Kaikoura, yeah. Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering. I mean, we don't know, of course, 10:15, but should that be brought back a little bit to 9:30 or 9 or what?
Could be. We could make that decision on the 27th, depend, and as long as there's a bit of space in I think the only thing that would be is CIs or something ahead of that. So I think we could make that work. Yeah.
We would have to advertise the start time for the council meeting. So we can ask the governance team now if we could start on the 29th earlier at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
But
I think it's
so
a
leave it
smart
that
thing
with us.
to plan for now. Yep. Noting that there's a few of us that have other appointments. Yeah. I mean, hopefully we don't need it, but I think let's plan ahead. So it's a good point that's raised. So if we can put that and do what needs to be done to do the notice to say that that could start at 9 a.m. might be useful. So thank you. Cool.
Okay, so just to wrap up, in terms of post-deliberations, as I mentioned earlier, we will have really 2 weeks after deliberations to complete the final version of the annual plan. That will be published online on the 19th of June and provided to councillors, and then council will come back on the 25th of June to consider the annual plan for adoption, following which the rates will be set. So it's really important we get those answers through the deliberations process to give us time to prepare the final document, which includes any budgetary changes, and that we get that online and meet our statutory timeframes.
Got it. Any other questions, councillors? No, we are all clear. Been here, done that before, so that's good. Thank you so much, and appreciate all the work that's gone into this and the responses today. Thank you.